The nurse had just told me I was 8 centimeters dilated when my husband looked at his phone, whispered something I couldn't hear, and walked out of that delivery room without looking back. The door swung shut behind him, and the only sound in the room was the steady pulse of the fetal monitor and the fluorescent light humming above my head. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already been quietly building the case that would take everything from him. My name is Raven. I'm 34 years old. That was 14 months ago on the night of March 3rd at 11:42 p.m. in a hospital room on the 4th floor of Mercy General in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had been in labor for 19 hours. My daughter was 4 centimeters away from entering the world, and her father was in the parking garage, I would later discover, with a woman named Sienna, a name I had first seen on his phone 7 months earlier, when I was barely showing and still trying to believe the best version of what I was living. What they didn't know was that I had been documenting everything since the day I found that first text message. Every date, every amount, every lie. By the time Marcus walked out of that hospital room, I had a folder, 147 pages thick, waiting in the hands of my attorney. But before I tell you what the judge said the morning he reviewed that folder, I need to take you back to where this really began. Not to the night I found the messages, not even to the first time I sensed something was wrong. I need to take you back 9 years, to a rainy Tuesday in November when I met Marcus Cole at a graduate school orientation in Boston, and I thought I had found the one person in the world who truly saw me. Before I go any further, if this story is already hitting somewhere close to home, take a moment and subscribe to this channel. Only if you feel something real. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love knowing who's on the other side of the screen. Now let me take you back to Boston, 9 years ago. I was 25 years old, working toward my master's degree in forensic accounting at Boston University. I know, not the most glamorous field. People hear forensic accounting and picture spreadsheets, but what it really is the art of finding what someone tried to hide. Numbers tell stories. Incomplete numbers tell louder ones. My grandmother, Grandma Adele, had been the one to push me toward numbers in the first place. She was 74 years old, sharp as a letter opener, and she used to sit at her kitchen table in Providence with a cup of black coffee and a ledger book she'd kept since 1981. She ran her own seamstress business for 31 years, and she never let a single dollar pass through her hands without knowing exactly where it came from and where it went. I used to sit beside her when I was a girl and watch her pencil move across those columns, and she'd say, "Raven, the truth is always in the numbers. People lie with their mouths. Numbers don't know how." I didn't fully understand what she meant until I was deep into my career, but I understand it now better than I've ever understood anything. Marcus walked into that orientation carrying a coffee in each hand and looking for somewhere to sit. He had easy eyes, a quiet voice, and a laugh that started slow and built before you realized you were laughing too. He was getting his MBA. We sat next to each other for 3 hours, shared a terrible blueberry muffin from the welcome table, and talked until the room emptied around us. By the time we walked out into the November rain together, something had already settled between us. The comfortable kind. The kind you're usually afraid to trust because it feels too immediate. I should have paid attention to that fear. I didn't. We married 4 years later, in a small ceremony in his hometown of Raleigh. By then I had been hired by a mid-size firm in Charlotte, doing the work I loved. Audit reviews, financial investigations, corporate fraud detection. I was good at it. Marcus had a sales position at a medical supply company, and we had what looked from the outside like a clean, well-ordered life. A 3-bedroom house on Hartwell Street, 2 cars, weekend farmers market runs, the kind of life that photographs well. What nobody photographs is the slow erosion underneath, the way a person starts choosing their phone over a conversation, the way they begin staying late on Thursdays, then Thursdays and Tuesdays, then 3 nights a week. The way they say, I'm just tired. Until you stop believing it, but you keep accepting it because you're also exhausted. And because you're 5 months pregnant. And the idea of what you're already suspecting feels like a weight you can't afford to carry yet. On August 19th, at 6:22 in the morning, I picked up Marcus's phone from the nightstand to turn off his alarm. He was in the shower. The screen lit with a text from a contact listed only as S, and the message was 4 words I will not repeat, but they made the nature of the relationship unmistakable. I put the phone down. I turned off the alarm. I sat at the edge of the bed for exactly 4 minutes, looking at the pale morning light coming through the curtains, and I made the first decision in a long series of deliberate, quiet decisions. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I opened the Notes app on my own phone and typed the date, the time, and what I had seen as precisely as I could remember it. Then I went downstairs and made breakfast. I want to pause here for a second. If you've ever stood at the exact moment when the truth lands, and you realize your entire life has been built on something that wasn't real, type, "I understand," in the comments. Because what happened in me that morning wasn't grief, exactly. It was something colder and more focused than grief. It was recognition. And recognition, for me, always leads to action. Over the next 6 weeks, while Marcus continued his performance of normalcy, dinners, back rubs, questions about the baby's nursery colors, I began the most methodical investigation of my professional life. Not because I wanted to destroy him, because I had a child coming into this world, and I needed to know exactly what financial reality she was arriving into. I am, after all, a forensic accountant, and I had begun to suspect that the deception wasn't only personal. I was right. What I found over those 6 weeks, working at my desk after Marcus went to sleep, cross-referencing bank statements, credit card records, and tax documents, was not just infidelity. It was financial fraud. Marcus had been quietly redirecting funds from our joint savings account, small amounts at first, $400 here, $650 there, then larger transfers, into an account I had no knowledge of. Over a period of 22 months, $61,400 had been moved. Some of it could be traced to a second apartment lease on the east side of Charlotte, a lease that began, I would discover, on the exact same month I announced my pregnancy. The morning I confirmed the final transfer amount, I sat in my home office at 2:11 a.m., with the window cracked and the September air coming in cool and clean, and I heard my grandmother's voice as clearly as if she were sitting across from me. "The truth is always in the numbers, Raven." I printed every document. I organized them into 14 labeled sections. I called my attorney, Joanna, the following morning, and we met at her office on Park Road at 4 p.m., where I handed her the folder and watched her face change as she turned the pages. "He didn't know you were a forensic accountant when he started this, did he?" she said. "He knew exactly what I did," I told her. "He just thought I'd never look." Joanna filed for divorce 3 days later. We asked for emergency injunctive relief to freeze the joint assets pending investigation. Marcus came home on a Friday evening to find a copy of the petition on the kitchen counter, and me sitting at the dining table with a cup of tea, completely calm. He looked at the papers. He looked at me. He said, "Raven, I can explain all of this." I said, "I know." And then I stood up, went upstairs, and closed the bedroom door. The weeks that followed were the strangest I've ever lived. Marcus cycled through anger, then remorse, then negotiation, then threats, then something approaching desperation. His attorney called Joanna 3 times in the first week alone. Meanwhile, I was 7 months pregnant, commuting to work and sleeping more peacefully than I had in 2 years, because the terrible waiting was over. What I'd feared had proven true, and truth, even painful truth, is easier to carry than suspicion. On March 3rd, I drove myself to Mercy General because Marcus had not come home by the time my contractions were 8 minutes apart. I left him a voicemail at 7:14 p.m. He arrived at the hospital at 9 p.m., took a seat in the corner, and spent the first hour on his phone. At 11:42 p.m., with 2 hours still to go, his phone buzzed. He looked at it. He stood up, and he said, and I am quoting this precisely because I wrote it down the next day while it was still exact in my mind, "I have to step out for a minute." Then he walked out, and he did not come back. My daughter, Claire Adele Cole, was born at 1:17 a.m. on March 4th, weighing 7 pounds 4 ounces, with the assistance of a labor nurse named Linda, who held my hand for the last 40 minutes and who I still think about. My friend Margot arrived at 1:34 a.m., 17 minutes after the birth, having driven 23 miles from her apartment in Concord the moment I'd texted her. She was the first person to hold Claire after me. Marcus arrived at 2:50 a.m. with a gas station coffee and the look of a man who had calculated what expression to wear. The custody and divorce proceedings were scheduled for June 11th, 4 months later. I had continued building my documentation during those months, adding the digital records Joanna had subpoenaed: emails, location data, bank transactions. The folder was now 147 pages. Marcus's attorney was preparing to argue that the financial transfers were, in his framing, informal household management decisions, and that the infidelity, while unfortunate, had no bearing on asset division under North Carolina law. What Marcus and his attorney did not know was that Joanna had filed a supplemental motion 3 days before the hearing, attaching a certified forensic accounting report, authored by me, reviewed by 2 independent CPAs, and notarized, documenting the $61,400 in transfers, the dates, the destination account, and the beneficiary of that account, which had been used to fund what amounted to a second household maintained for Sienna over a period of 22 months. This was not simply adultery, it was dissipation of marital assets. Under North Carolina law, that distinction matters enormously. The morning of June 11th was bright and warm, the kind of early summer day that makes Charlotte feel generous. I wore a navy blazer over a white blouse. Claire was with Margot. I arrived at the Mecklenburg County Courthouse at 8:15 a.m., 45 minutes early, and sat in the hallway with a cup of coffee and the particular stillness that comes when you have done everything that can be done, and the outcome now belongs to someone else. The hearing began at 9 a.m. Marcus's attorney presented first, smooth, organized, minimizing. I listened to him reduce 22 months of documented deception into a difficult period in the marriage, with something close to admiration for his composure. Then Joanna presented our response. She placed the 147-page report before the judge, the Honorable Sandra Whitmore, and walked her through it section by section. The transfers, the dates, the lease agreement for the East Charlotte apartment, the correlation between those withdrawals and specific entries in Marcus's personal calendar, the detailed timeline that established, without ambiguity, that $61,400 in marital funds had been used to maintain a separate residence for a third party during the period of the marriage, including the entirety of my pregnancy. Judge Whitmore was quiet for a long time after Joanna finished, the kind of quiet that does the work that words never could. She looked at the report. She looked at Marcus. She looked at me. And then she said, "And I will carry these words for the rest of my life. Counsel, your client appears to have been unaware that his wife's professional specialty is finding exactly this kind of thing. I find the dissipation claim credible and compelling." Marcus's face did not crumble dramatically. That only happens in movies. What happened was subtler and, in some ways, more final. The color simply drained from it, slowly, like water leaving a glass. The judgment came down 6 weeks later. In addition to standard asset division, the court ordered Marcus to reimburse the marital estate for the full $61,400 with statutory interest, bringing the total to $67,300. I was granted primary physical custody of Claire, with Marcus receiving supervised visitation pending a parenting evaluation. The house on Hartwell Street was awarded to me, along with my retirement account, which Marcus had attempted to claim partial credit for during negotiations. His attorney sent a settlement offer 9 days after the judgment, proposing a payment plan. Joanna responded on my behalf within 24 hours. Marcus called me once, 3 weeks after the ruling. He said he was sorry. He said it like a man who had practiced the words but still didn't understand what they were for. I listened until he finished. Then I said, "I know you are, Marcus." And I ended the call. There's a moment, and if you've been through something like this, you know the one, when the case is closed and the documents are filed and life simply continues. It arrives quieter than you expect. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like a window opening. 2 months after the judgment, on a Sunday morning, I was sitting in the kitchen on Hartwell Street with coffee and the newspaper, and Claire was in her bouncer on the table, and she grabbed my finger and held it with the focused seriousness of a 5-month-old. And I thought about Grandma Adele at her kitchen table in Providence with her ledger book, her black coffee, and her certainty that the truth is always in the numbers. I didn't seek revenge. I want to be clear about that. I sought documentation. I sought accuracy. I sought the same thing I seek in every financial investigation I conduct at work. The true picture behind the presented one. The fact that the truth, once fully visible, produced its own consequences. That wasn't revenge. That was just numbers doing what numbers do. What I've learned in the 14 months since that hospital room is this. The most powerful thing you can do when someone underestimates you is continue to do your work quietly and completely. Don't announce your case. Don't threaten with it. Build it. File it. Let it speak in the room where it matters. Marcus believed I was distracted by grief and pregnancy and the 1,000 ordinary tasks of keeping a household running. He was right that I was doing all of those things. He was wrong that they were the only things. If this story has moved you in any way, if it's given you something to hold on to, or reminded you of your own strength in a moment when you weren't sure it was there, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what's the one thing you would have done differently, or the one thing you wouldn't change? I read every single one. If you know someone who needs to hear this today, please share it with them. Sometimes the right story at the right moment is the thing that steadies a person. And if you're new to this channel, subscribe. There's another story waiting for you in the description, and I'll be back very soon. Thank you for being here, all the way to the end. I'll see you next time.